All right, now live. Let's have conversations based in reality. I would say most of the conversations that I have are not based in reality. Just going to go do a random one of these. See if anybody comes on. What day is today? I don't even know what day it is. Wednesday? The day of the week? I'm not even sure. But back to the point, conversations based in reality. I have these weird, like, I don't know, guys think they know what they're talking about, and they have these, like, I don't know, hypothetical opinion type things. I try to exist in the real world, doing things in real time, really growing fish, really helping people with real pond problems right now. I don't really have much patience to go back and forth. I guess it depends on the tone of the back and forth. But that being said, I would say misinformation wise and how to start the conversation out where I'm just like rolling my eyes kind of without really doing that. What's up, John? John said he's getting in trouble for messing around on YouTube at work. Well, John, I've been going live at different times because I think it only records the hours towards me getting monetized when when the live goes off, and it's watched like a video instead of participated with live like this. Is at least I think. I'm not even exactly sure on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how that's working. So I'm doing random lives. um, so I get random views back on it from regulars and stuff. But it's cool, man. I appreciate you watching. I was about to talk about genetics and how, like, over the years, it's just like a dog whistle for I don't know what I'm talking about. I mean, it is the first thing that everybody wants to talk about is genetics. How are we going to fix the genetics? It's like the genetics isn't your problem. Is it true that some fish genetically will grow larger than others? Absolutely, that is true. Um, I guess what I'm saying is, though, you have to set the pond up the right way to get the genetics to matter. So the point that I'm making is, like, I show up to the spot, and this is almost like every real world situation that I was ever in as a consultant. Put the boat in, do the electrofishing survey, go back to the guy and tell him, hey, you've got a problem that you need to correct. Usually that problem's crowded predators. Bass or bass and crappie most of the time. But anyway. Okay, how do we fix the genetics? It's like, okay, you don't have a genetics problem. You have an overcrowded fish population problem. Okay. Your fish can't express their genetic potential because they're not growing properly. Because we as scientists can control that growth rate. We can reduce the population down a little bit and make the fish that are left grow a little faster. You see, so when the conversation begins with genetics, hey, we're going to stock some new genetics in here. It's like, no, you're not. Again, it's just like a dog whistle for I have no idea. I've never done this before, and I'm just going to copy what I've heard on television. Right? We're not having a conversation based in reality. We're not having a conversation based on a job you've done. We're just having a conversation based in something you heard about and you've heard a lot of people talk about, and you think they know what they're talking about, and they don't. And that's where a lot of the problems come in on the comment section. That's the idea that I'm having with these argumentative, passive aggressive type comments are always based in that. It's not based in a job, right? Jackson, what's up? Good morning. I'm always talking about this theoretical, like I'll call it book knowledge that people think that they have, right? And that's the problem with that kind of stuff. You can selectively cherry pick something from the last guy that just did it 20 minutes ago from Minnesota. You know, he's taking some point about some 50,000 acres of water, of naturally glacier formed water, and trying to make a conclusion towards pond management in Georgia. You know, we might as well be talking about marlin. You know, it's not the same thing. So I guess what I'm saying is it's like you can tell how much experience somebody has with this kind of base where the conversation starts. And when it starts at genetics, you know, you're dealing with a rookie. It's like, nah, like, okay, we'll talk genetics in a situation where, oh, you've got a brand new pond or you've got a pond you've drained and we're going to start it and stock it perfectly like we did Sugar Hill. Okay. Now we can have a conversation in genetics. All right. You got a situation where genetics are going to matter. You want that cow pasture pond back there on the back 90 with the 18 different species of trash fish in it, and you want to come to me and talk about genetics? Man, you ain't gonna worry about genetics in that. Don't worry about crappie eating all the bass fry and ruining it and everything dying. That's what you need to be worried about. But genetics, nah, not so much. And I don't know. That's why I keep coming on here. That's why I keep doing this stuff, because I want to keep telling people what actually happened at work on ponds with the fish populations, not what you think you heard on professional fishing or YouTube or whatever. And I think based on, hey, we got 6 folks in here. That's pretty good. Based on that, and based on the viewership numbers and the subscriber rate that's going on, I think there is a significant demand for somebody who can speak on fisheries in a way that helps a do-it-yourselfer or somebody with a real world problem, you know, exist in reality. Let's exist in reality. I don't want to exist in, I don't even really know how to describe it, but they always go the same way. It's always like what they think is happening, not what they've measured, because that's the difference. Like, I've measured it. I'm not on here telling you what I like. I didn't go to college, read a book, and not telling you what I think's going on in the environment. That's not how that's working. I drove 1.2, almost 5 million miles. I drove across 10 states, 12 states, all over the Southeast. I did electrofishing surveys. I took measurements, and this is what I measured. And I wish I could tell people what they think I measured is what I actually measured, but it's not. It's not even close. And I wish the guys who had bigger platforms over the last 30 or 40 years would listen to guys, because there's a lot of guys like me. I'm not the only guy who's done. I'm probably one of the only guys who's done it across 10 states. That's kind of rare. Most shockings work and biologists work in one localized area. They do jump from place to place, but they usually don't go from Georgia to Mississippi in the same year, I guess, where I would, you know. But it's not that much different, really. Most places in the Southeast, anyway, have pretty much similar problems. There'll be different types of fish species in different areas kind of doing different things. But hey, Brian, what's up, man? Thanks for joining. If you guys have any questions about whatever, I'm just working on. See, we can do this on here. I'm working on using StreamYard. And I've actually purchased it, so I'm into how it really works. And I need to be better at software and technology. And I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos on how to get better at this stuff and how to do better interviews and how to speak better, all that stuff. So hopefully that'll pay off. Anyway, back to genetics and ponds. So again, let's keep it on a real world. And what we got in Sugar Hills is a perfect example. We've got a good situation, a great situation, ideal situation where we've got a forage base that was established. It's the best forage base that we can have in bluegill, and they're being fed daily. And there's not a cap on that feed because feed costs can be pretty expensive on the high protein stuff. And Clint has been very generous in spreading the high protein. And so let's describe what that means so people understand. Let's put numbers to that too, measurements, So everybody knows what a bag of fish or a bag of food looks like a bag of dog food. Fish food comes in the same 50-pound bag. You get it at most farm supply stores. Tractor Supplies has it, Now the higher protein stuff might be harder to come by. You might have to order that or get somebody to help you with that. Usually you'll have like a standard floating catfish feed at most of those places. And you can tell on the bag, it'll be 32% protein feed. So that means 68% of it's like cornmeal, it's mostly, it floats. So that tells you a lot. Because as the protein content goes to 50%, that feed usually doesn't float, and it's usually much smaller too, and much oilier looking, darker looking. The lighter stuff kind of has kind of a more a corn color, I guess, is better because it's probably what's in it, corn. You'll notice too, like the grass carp will be on the cheaper stuff a little harder. They won't eat the higher protein stuff as hard as they do the cheaper stuff, I think, because of that corn content. So if you have problems with grass carp on your feed, you can bump up to the higher protein, kind of help keep them off of it a little bit. But the conversion rates, the math. So if you throw 32% protein floating catfish feed, I mean, that's fine. The fish will grow good on it. It works pretty good. For every 100 pounds of fish food consumed by the bluegill, those bluegill will gain 50 pounds. Understand that's across a bunch of tiny little, fish from 1/10 of a pound to 1 pound, that's spread out. But for every 100 pounds you throw, bluegill gain 50. You spend the extra money on the higher protein stuff, and it's 80% conversion. So for every 100 pounds you throw, 80% is converted to fish tissue. And, you get what you pay for on fish feed and most everything else. So we are in a situation where we have a ideal forage in bluegill. And that bluegill is not only is it ideal and stocked initially a year before the bass ever went in, but it's also been fed and boosted to a higher productivity level to where it's kind of, if it was a race car engine, it would be hitting on all cylinders very well, running very well. And then we put our bass in there. And we put our bass in there small at fry size, not transported large fish from someplace else. Never do that. In the new pond situation, your fish will grow better. It'll be cheaper. It'll be, just trust me on this, use the small bass. Never transport adult bass into a new pond. Never transport bass into any pond, stream, lake, river. Put them in a cooler, put them in a fish taco. Don't put them in another body of water. Do us all a favor. You're usually messing up when you do that. That being said, Oh, Jackson's got a question. Sorry, Jackson, I didn't see your question there. He's got a real question in real time. Let's really answer it. He wants to grow a big bluegill. Okay. And is the copper nose the best bluegill to use? Well, Jackson, I'm going to need a little more information. How big is the pond? Where's the pond? And well, let's start with those two things right there. How big is the pond and where is the pond? So Jackson has an interesting situation in that he wants to grow the biggest bluegill possible, right? So what Jackson will do, what all Jackson has to do to grow the biggest bluegill possible. Okay, so we've got 1.5 acres of water in Mobile, Alabama. So we got south and definitely a manageable body of water. Now, if he had, say, 15 acres of water, he's got a different situation. I'm not saying he can't grow big bluegill in it, but I'm saying he's got a completely different situation because he's got something that's really hard for one guy to manage at that size. If he needed to stock or keep fish, either direction you need to go, 15, 20, 30 acres of water is more effort than one person can do by themselves usually. When you start talking about actually managing and actually moving enough fish. But 1.5 acres, that we can deal with. That's pretty easy. So all you got to do is exactly what you're told on everything in the media about bass fishing and management and everything you've heard in the media, just catch and release only, right? That kind of idea. So in a trophy bluegill pond, because what a stunted bass population is, okay, it's the other side of that coin. If I say stunted bass population, again, here's that. If I flip that over, other side of that is trophy bluegill population. And sorry, I got my pollen's got my nose running. Sorry. And why does it work that way? Okay, so what happens when your bass population stunts out? That means you've got more than you're probably going to be sitting around 60 to 70 bass per acre in most of these places. And when you get that many bass per acre, all their mouths are about that big. So everything that can fit in their mouth that's that big, frogs, fish, doesn't matter what, is gone. It doesn't exist. It gets eaten. There's tiny little bluegill at the edge, and when they grow out to about thumbnail size and try to move out off the edge and become bigger fish, the bass just eat them. Okay. So the bluegill that are being born, most of them are being eaten when they get to like 1.5 inches, 2 inches, because of all the hungry bass. There's so many hungry bass that those bluegill are keeping those bass alive. Those bass aren't getting any bigger. They're just staying alive, treading water out there, and they'll all be about 10 to 12 inches long if you do it just right. So all your bass mouths are like that. So now any fish that you put in there, and if I was to stock it new, I'd stock it with 4 to 6 inch bluegill, maybe 50 or 100 to an acre, not too many, just enough to have a bigger bluegill in the pond, a few per 50 per acre is plenty. Have some at a head start, put the feed to them, and you have some real big bluegill. Well, when all the bass in the pond have a mouth like that, and you've got a bluegill like that, it can't be eaten. The bass can't eat that bluegill. So that's how a stunted bass population is a trophy bluegill population. Once bluegill get bigger than what a 1 pound bass can eat, because that's the average size bass in a stunted population, now you got a trophy bluegill pond. So you just basically overstock your bass population if it's a new pond. If you've already got a stunted bass population, just leave it stunted. Just leave all the 1 pounders in there, and put a feeder on the pond and start feeding the bluegill that are there, and they'll get humongous because, again, there's nothing there to eat them, and you're giving them additional feed. And then that will go back to what we were just talking about if you're feeding them that 32% protein stuff, they'll grow, pretty good. If you're feeding them the higher protein stuff, they'll really grow good. And what we'll see at Sugar Hill Outdoors is our bluegill aren't going to get big. It's the opposite. I stocked 40 bass per acre instead of, like I said, I just told you like 60, right? Well, I put 40. So now that changes everything up. Now the bass can grow. When the bass eat, there's enough food at that rate that when they eat, they're actually putting on length, they're putting on weight, and they're getting bigger and they're growing. So that means their mouths are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So in a balanced pond where the bass are growing good, they climb up. Those bluegill become like steps: 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch, 4 inch, 5 inch. Each inch size fish goes to a different size class of bass. Those bigger bluegill go to bigger bass, smaller bluegill, smaller bass. And that's our job. And that's part of, like, if you watch carefully, you'll see it. Just like I said, when the bass population gets stunted, that 3 inch size class, 3 to 4 inch size class of bluegill will be missing. You'll be able to take a net and pull it in there and be like, oh, look, there's 1 inch, 2 inch. Wait, where's the 3 inch? Where's the 4? Oh, there's 6 inch, 7 inch. There's bigger ones and there's smaller ones, but there's none of these. Why are there none of these? Every time we pull this net, every time we run the shock boat, every time we look around, every time we catch a fish with a hook, these 3 to 4 inch bluegill are not here. Why? They should be. They're being born. We can see all their babies around the edges. We can see the older ones. Where are the middle ones? And you got to be. I've never seen just an average fisherman pick that up. You're going to need science class to know it at that level. What's up, Midwest? And that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about genetics earlier. It's like when the conversation immediately starts, and I've seen guys do it. I've had this has happened to me. Oh God, more times than I care to count. But you go to the pond, you do the electrovision survey, you tell the guy, all right, you got some harvest to do, you've got some 1-pounders to keep. Don't throw them in other ponds on the property. Don't throw them in the creek. Don't take them to the lake. Throw them anywhere else. Put them in a cooler. Give them to somebody who will eat them. Throw them in the woods. Let the coons eat them. Don't put them anywhere else. And then once you get those bass out of there, like, then we can talk about maybe doing some supplemental stocking if necessary. Habitat restoration, brush piles, things like that. But initially, the first thing you got to do, my advice to you, after you just gave me like $1,500 to electrofish your pond, is go keep 20 bass per acre out of it. You've got to get 20 bass per 1-pounders. 20 1-pound bass per acre per this year. Got to go. And write it all out, collect the check, go on my way, come back in a year. Guess how many bass have been removed from the pond? But guess what they did? Oh, I hear the stories. Well, we took these trees and we put them in, and we made these brush piles, and we took this plastic and we made these, and we took these boats and we sank them. And then we went and got crawdads from Louisiana, and we got shiners from South Georgia, and we got threadfin shad from South Alabama, and we got tilapia from, I don't know, the Magic Carpet Ride India guy that we saw down at the World's Fair. And we got everything on the earth, and we went and put it in that pond. Cool. How many bass did you keep? Go out there, put my shocking boat in, turn it on, zap the fish, weigh them, measure them. There's absolutely zero measurable difference from the year before to the next year. They did all that work. They spent all that money. They bought all those crawfish and the $15,000 worth of shad and the work for the trees. And every bit of it was a waste of time because they didn't listen. You didn't fix the problem. You can't have a bunch of structure with an extra 20 bass per acre. Those 20 bass per acre are going to go into those brush piles and waste whatever fish are there. It's like having an extra 20 snipers per acre on a battlefield. Not much is getting through. They're killers. I don't know, but that has played out in my life so many times that it makes you not want to pond consult anymore. Don't be that guy. What's up, Mike? Thanks for joining, man. I was just talking about the mistakes I've seen people make, and Jackson was talking about a trophy bluegill pond in Mobile. Hope that helps, Jackson. Oh, my man Alex up there flipping kicks, and he sent a picture, and he's got a if I could share it, which I should learn how to share things on here. I don't know how to share yet. Sorry, y'all. Let's see. It says present slides. It says you have no slides. Google Slides or your computer. So if I put that picture into Google Slides, I can access that from here and I can pop those pictures up. All right. That's what I'm doing on here today, boys, is just learning how to do StreamYard a little bit. Sorry about the delay there. But anyway, Flipping Kicks up there sent me a picture of a bass that was 16 inches long, and I don't remember what it was. We figured it out, though. It was 80% relative weight, which is poor. We want our fish at about 100. 93 is acceptable, but anything above 93, anything higher than 93 is good. Also, we have to consider the bias in our situation that you'll see consultants kind of like, all right, so I've got some bass at Sugar Hill Outdoors that have been over 150% relative weight. But you have to understand they're eating fed bluegill. And the relative weight, standard weight chart was made from public water fish, not eating those bluegill. So there's some bias there as well. When the bass are consuming bluegill on feed, we have to take that into account. That's not like a true 150% relative weight fish. If I saw 150% relative weight fish in nature, I would tell that person without feed, just a natural environment, without being boosted with feed or fertilizer or anything, just like a regular pond out in the world, I would tell that person probably they're going to need to stock some bass. They probably have green sunfish or crappie or something that's been limiting their bass reproduction, and they probably only have a few bass per acre to have one that's that heavy just in the world. But like I said, in Sugar Hill Outdoors, 150, 140, 135% relative weights won't be uncommon because those are our super freaks that are eating pellet train bluegill, so we're getting a little bit of performance enhancing growth with the feed. But that's okay, because as long as we understand the bias on both sides of it, right? We can understand now. We understand, like, we got 4 pounds of growth on a northern bass in two seasons, right? We documented that, a couple of them actually. So that's some of the best growth on northern bass I've ever seen. 2 pounds a season. I've seen F1s grow 3 pounds a season, to give you a difference in the genetics. But I've also seen F1 stocked improperly grow to a pound and stunt completely out and don't do jack crap, because the dude who stocked them at 100 fish per acre or whatever ridiculous number that the fish sells. 1,000. I've even seen guys stock 1,000 bass per acre. Literally seen that. Or I'm stocking 40. They're stocking 1,000, 800, 500. Just whatever the guy wants to sell that day I've seen some stuff. And their bass population stunts out like that big, 8, 10 inches long. When you overcrowd it like that, it just stunts immediately. There's just a limit. It's just how it works, And in that situation, I've seen this happen too. They stock it like that. They take the advice of a fish salesman who's maybe not being exactly honest and selling them an extra fish or 10,000. And then the fish don't grow. They don't get the growth like I'm getting at Sugar Hill or anywhere close to it. And then they're like, well, genetics. Okay, again, you're completely missing the point. Genetics are not your problem. You stocked it improperly. Okay, the balance is your problem. The predator to prey ratio is your problem. That's always the problem when you're talking about fish growth. The secondary, when your fish aren't growing, predator prey is the problem. Not habitat, not any of the other stuff that these guys are telling you. If you've got a pond in your backyard and you're like, man, these bass are all a pound, all right, your predator prey relationship is wrong. And you generally fix that by adjusting the predators, not bringing in more prey. I was talking about Yellowstone National Park and like how the wolves changed. Wolves had been removed from the environment due to hunters, and they put them back, and how it changed the environment out there. If the wolf population was to get overcrowded in Yellowstone National Park, would the solution be to bring more elk to the crowded wolf population? No. That's kind of foolish, isn't it? It's like, can't do that really. You can't bring more forage to a bass population either. Now, the guy selling you the forage fish will make you think that you can, but you're pissing up a road completely for all your money. I will remind you, let's exist in the real world, do real world things. At the pond that I just stocked 2 years ago, we stocked the bluegill, a few red ear, a few grass carp, and some bluegill. Let it go about a year, put bass in there. We've stocked no other forage since then. We actually, that's a lie. We did try to do some threadfin shad in there. Clint really wanted a shad, and they didn't take. And that's actually pretty normal for them. They're a sensitive fish, and one of the reasons why I don't like them, because of that sensitivity. They can be sensitive to the cold and all die. They can also be sensitive to the heat and all die. That does not, I'm not saying that doesn't happen to bluegill, but it happens to bluegill a lot less than it happens to shad. Shad are expensive. Shad are hard to establish sometimes. Now, other times, and I don't even know why, you can just show the lake a few thread fins and it just runs over with them, and the bass get fat on them, and the world is perfect. And you would think that the threadfin shad is the greatest thing that ever happened on earth. I have seen that before. I have seen it more times where we spent $1,500 on shad and they didn't do a lot. You stocked them, they just kind of disappeared. I've seen that happen more than the other, where you put the shad in and now all of a sudden there's schools of shad everywhere and everybody's fat and happy and everything worked great. I've seen that happen a few times. So I guess what I'm getting at is threadfin shad do work good sometimes, but they're inconsistent. And you need to be aware of that, especially when it's $2,000 for a load of 10,000 shad, especially since we spent that. Perfect example. We spent that money at the pond, didn't get what we wanted out of it. Clint was fully willing to buy some more and try it again. I told him, let's just let the bluegill go. Let it establish like this. We can always add them again later. But since they did that, I play it like golf, play it as it lies, we're not foot wedging it out or anything. We tried stocking shad. They didn't really take very well. That's I've seen it, that didn't surprise me. That wasn't out of left field to me at all. We just started feeding the bluegill. Maybe we've seen a couple balls of shad, but again, normally when the thread fins go off in a pond, you can see them. There's schools of shad everywhere, and I have not seen that. So we're making a living mostly on bluegill reproduction, and the bass are growing great. And we've put no other forage fish in since 2000, after we stocked the bass in 22, in spring of 22. I haven't stocked any crawfish. I haven't stocked any minnows. I haven't stocked any supplemental forage. of any kind. The only thing I've done is feed the bluegill so their weights stay consistently high just through the growing season, not all winter. You don't have to feed them in the winter, but when it gets warm and the temperatures get to about 65 or so, feed your bluegill and your bass will grow. Let's see. Midwest has caught 2 bass this year. Well done, sir. Hey, man, it's like February I guess it's March now, but that's pretty good for where you're at. It's cold up there. The 16-inch with the thin body and big head. Yeah, man, I've seen enough of that in my life for sure. I can show these questions and then you guys can read them too. Yeah, well, let's talk about that. That's a good point. That bulk up. All right, so it's late February, early March. Bass should be bulked. The bass right here behind the house look like units, right? The water temperature, that's where the misconception kind of comes in, and like that I don't know what I want to call it. Selective, where you kind of cherry pick. Well, it's still cold and the bass haven't had time. No, this is pre-spawn, man. If it had something to chew, it would be chewing it, especially right now. Right? So the big head, skinny body right now, that's a bad sign. Bad sign. And again, that if I'm managing that pond, it depends on the situation I'm in. But if I'm managing that pond, if I see a 16-inch fish, big head, skinny body at Sugar Hill Outdoors, that fish is going in a cooler. He's not getting a second chance. Not, oh, I hope he's okay. No, he's through dealing. And we're going to be pulling probably 15 out after the shocking bug. Like if there's anything under 2 pounds, any fish that had 2 seasons in my lake at that stocking rate that hasn't put on at least a pound a year, that joker's tacos. I got F1s coming in behind it. It'll grow 3 pounds in a season. I ain't got time for that. Yeah, Anthony. I don't really. I mean, you sound like bashing people for stocking. Where I think it is from my perspective, you're wasting your time and money. You can't go collect enough to make any difference, any measurable difference in the weight of the bass. So again, let's use real world examples because I've had a ton of guys doing that, stocking shiners, catching them from wherever, bringing them in. The first thing you're doing there is you've got a pond that's isolated away. Usually, it's kind of its own thing, its own ecosystem. So when you're pulling bait fish from other places like that, you're bringing in parasites and disease. And that's something most guys don't consider. And I've seen ponds get real sick from diseases that were brought in from bait buckets, from bringing stuff from other places because they didn't understand how to deprivate and clean. Fish hatcheries will hold fish for days at a time in medicated water to make sure they're not transporting disease from hatchery ponds to your pond. And that's why it's really important when you stock your fish that you get them from a reputable hatchery that understands that, or you can get, because in hatcheries, diseases are bad because the fish are really crowded together a lot. You can have the worst kinds of fish diseases in that situation. But that's what I'm getting at. I just see guys like it's almost like an intellectual level, kind of so far removed from reality. You can't catch enough. You'll break your back trying to feed bass like that. Like, they eat so much that's why I do this, to teach guys, look, take all that time you would spend dragging nets or spending money or doing all the stuff that you're wanting to do with stocking and apply that to harvesting, because you're probably going to need that much effort. It depends on the size of the pond. If it's a small pond, those are easy to manage. You can just harvest those, and you'll see the quickest results with the least amount of harvest, because small ponds are easier to manipulate. But if you have 20, 30, 40 acres of water, most of the time, what these guys are finding out who are listening is, wow, I've got to fish twice as much as I've been fishing, and I've got to keep everything I catch. Nothing. I'm not putting anything back ever again. Like if it hits my hook, it goes in the cooler. When's the last time you fished with somebody like that? When's the last time you've seen somebody fish that way? You know, it's rare, right? But that's what you should be doing. That's what I'm going to be doing. That's what I've been doing for 30 years. Like I know when it's time, when they got to go, and they're going. Yeah, Midwest, that's probably not good. Agree with you on that one. My knee is just aching. No, that's a good question, Josh. I get that one a lot, and no, it's a physics thing. So now, does that mean that you won't have a huge bluegill and a huge bass in the same pond? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is though, like when you take a pond and like at the end of this fall and then into next year, and we got this little 2.5 acre pond set up with these bass the way they're going to be, they're going to be some really nice bass in there. We're not going to see 10 and 12-inch bluegill. All right. There's going to be a large population of bass with mouths like that. All right. Now, we started this conversation out talking about stunted bass populations where all their mouths are like 1 pounders. They're all about like that. And they can't eat a decent sized bluegill. Well, I've got every fish in there, like every male, the males will go to 5 pounds and the females, Lord knows how big they'll get. So by the end of this year, every fish in there is going to be 4 or 5 pounds. Okay. You're not going to see trophy bluegill. Okay. They're not going to survive. And that's what I mean by recruitment. I need fish being born in because those bluegill are going down the gullet of those bass. And I need it staggered right so those bass can't eat them all. So the reproduction can keep going and the bass can kind of chew into that, but not chew it to the point where they're affecting their growth. Just chew it to the point where they're managing the bluegill reproduction and growing well. But you're not going to have big 12-inch bluegill coming out of Sugar Hill Outdoors. And if you go look at the videos now, look at the big schools of bluegill now, they get to about like that. And the only reason they're like that right now, you'll see a shift this year. Like if you pay attention, you've been watching enough, Josh, like watch the feeder. Right now, there's a vast amount of slightly bigger than hand-sized bluegill around the feeder at Sugar Hill. That's going to change because those fish are just now becoming forage for the bass are just now starting to catch up. They're just now getting to that 5, 6 where the mouth is getting to the point where they can eat whatever they want. And when that happens, you'll see the population dynamic around the feeder change. There's kind of it being a new pond, the way it was stocked, there's a slightly abnormally higher percentage of large bluegill forage for our bass right now by the way we staggered it. So as these bass go 4, 5, 6 pounds, they're going into an unnaturally large population of bluegill that will never exist in the pond again in this manner. And it's because of the way the pond was staggered when it was stocked. So you can kind of have one or the other. Like once you establish a trophy bass population, you don't really have to worry about a whole bunch of other fish getting very big. They're going to eat them. And then the flip side is true as well. Once you've established a trophy bluegill population, well, you've stunted the bass, so all their mouths are like that. So you don't have a situation conducive for trophy bass. Does that mean in a trophy bluegill pond that a bass can't grow up for whatever reason and get big enough to eat whatever bluegill it wants? No, it happens all the time. Like that bass, that 8-pound bass in a trophy bluegill pond is harvested. You don't want it in there. It's gonna eat the fish that your bluegill. I'm positive. Be like putting a lion out there with your livestock. It's a bad move. So if you're in a trophy bluegill pond, bass over, say, 16, 18 inches, you harvest. You don't want them in that pond. You don't want them eating your big bluegill. Yeah, Midwest parasites, and then you got the invasive plants. And then you've got competing fish, like ponds are not lakes, ponds are not rivers. Guys, you can easily, especially when fish are smaller, sunfish wise, you can easily bring competing fish that you don't want into your pond. There's a big misconception about diversity in ponds. The pond that I have right now, I've got bluegill and red ear. Those are my forage fish, and the bluegill are on feed, and the bass grew 2 pounds a year. Right? Have you ever even seen that? Okay, and on one forage fish, bluegill, and a few red ear. But like the red ear, I stock like 50 per acre. There's not that many in there, so you can just basically consider it bluegill. That works because bluegill spawn more than all the other sunfish combined. When a bass eats a bluegill, there's another one born and ready to take its place. If I put golden shiner in there and say 30% of that pond becomes golden shiner, a bass eats a golden shiner, the golden shiner only spawns once a year. So 30% of my forage base just became a once a year forage pop instead of a monthly forage pop. I mean, it's not technically monthly, but I mean, bluegill still are going to get you spawns, 3, 4, 5 spawns, depending on where you are. It can get too hot for them to spawn, and of course, it's going to be too cold for them to spawn. But as far as spawning goes, there's nothing in North America that outspawns a bluegill. Like nothing. The best thing I can have in a 2.5 acre pond is a pure bluegill forage base. It gave me the 2 pounds of growth I got on my bass. Like, just hold the fish up. This happened. So think about that the next time you go to a pond that has all those diverse species of fish. Oh, it's got this, it's got that, it's got shiners, it's got this and that and the other. And your bass aren't growing 2 pounds a year, are they? Nope. Because that's actually inefficient in a pond. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. It's kind of where I started this whole thing out with the genetics. It's like we're having conversations that really aren't even based in reality. You're telling me put shiners in there and put shad, put this, put that, put all these things in there. They're going to make my pond worse. And I don't want my pond to be worse. I want my pond to grow big fish. Oh, Josh, like you can definitely like in new situations, like you can bump it towards a little bit more balanced. I'm kind of bumped towards real bass heavy. I'm sorry, trophy bass, away from bass heavy on Sugar Hill Outdoors. We bumped it towards exceptional bass growth. But you'll get really great bluegill growth and really great bass growth on a new pond to mix together. Just stock a little higher. You go to about 50 bass per acre. They won't be growing quite 2 pounds per season, but a pound per season, maybe a little higher, pound and a half, and good bluegill growth. A real good mix. Like they mix well together. You can have a nice balanced system. But again, to maintain that balance, you'll usually be keeping fish, not stocking them. And that's where people make their mistakes. They keep thinking that this is fixed with money, with stocking. And it's usually not. It's usually fixed with effort and harvest and fishing. Yes, Anthony. That's a good question, man. Yeah, it's called carrying capacity. So we can, again, let's just use the numbers, and I'll use the numbers in the pond. So they're real world, and it's in Georgia. So, it can be different in different places, but this is just how it is in Georgia. So when I stock the pond with the bluegill and the red ear, and then a year later with the bass, right? Or let's just start it out. I stocked the pond with the bluegill. All right. I let it go for a year, and I had the feeder going. So what I did was in Georgia, without a feeder, in a 2.5 acre pond, that pond will hold on average 100 pounds of fish per acre. All right. So I stock those bluegill, and I just don't put the feeder on. I don't do anything, and I just let them go for a year, 2 years, 3 years. It doesn't really matter how long I let them go. They'll spawn, right? And since there's nothing to control their numbers, they'll overspawn. They'll be crowded. They'll all be about that big, and they'll stun out because you just have the bluegill forage alone is not a food web, right? So they won't be healthy bluegill. But when you drain that pond, that 2.5 acres down, we'll have 250 pounds of skinny, ugly, stunted. We'll have 100 pounds of bluegill per acre, right? That's what the zooplankton and the aquatic insects can support. It'll be in that area. Now, let's say we did the same thing again, and except this time, instead of letting the bluegill stun out, we stock some bass at 40 bass per acre, just like we did. And we got our great growth, just like we did. We'll just use the real world example. Okay. Pretending we didn't feed, we'd get similar amounts of growth, not quite as good a growth, but pretty close. We drain that lake down with the bass and the bluegill, we're still going to have 100 pounds of fish per acre, or in a 2.5 acre pond, 250 pounds of fish, right? In bass and bluegill. But we've got to mix together the right way. So the bluegill are being eaten. There's enough bass to eat the bluegill so that they don't get skinny and stunted and starved and sick. And there's few enough bass that the bluegill can produce enough reproduction that those bass are healthy and grow. So that's our job, is to maintain that balance between those two. If I added whatever fish I added to it, and this is what crappie do, okay? So we have 100 pounds of fish per acre, and it's in bass and bluegill, right? Say we have like, I don't know, 25 pounds of bass and 75 pounds of bluegill, but then crappie come in and get into the stream. And over a couple years, because they spawn earlier and they're really good predators and they're not good in ponds, you immediately see the bass weights drop. You immediately see the bluegill reproduction start to go away around the edges. There won't be near as many fish around the edges because crappie are eating them up. What can happen a lot of times with ponds is 85 pounds of the 100 pounds of fish per acre is skinny, stunted crappie that are this big, and the other 15 pounds are bluegill and bass. And it just goes there. You can't change it. You can't fix it. You can't stop it. The crappie just do that to you. Just put you in that place. And I know the guy, but what about bass eat crappie and do? I know. But this is not how it works. Again, we're in the real world with how this works. And not about how you think it's going to work, about how I've watched it work. And that's what happens. It's what happens at Wilson's Pond right over there in Thomasville. He's got 7 acres of stunted crappie and it's happened twice in 30 years. It just happens. It's how it is. So back to your thing. Yes, whatever fish you put in there displaces the exact amount of fish that are there. It doesn't increase the amount of fish in the pond. Something starves to death or something eats its way in there. But yeah, it won't go. If you have a natural carrying capacity of 100 fish per acre, and you bring 100 pounds of fish into a 1 acre pond and put it in Georgia, you're going to have some starvation death. It'll take it a while because it takes a while to starve. They're not going to stock them and they'll be dead the next day. But you're going to have some poor looking fish because you can't put as many fish as you want. That's not how that works. I'm trying to figure out what you're talking about here, Josh. Let's see. There's a different situation. You're wanting right now. Okay, I see what you're saying. His aunt has a pond. I missed that post there. Okay. Sorry, boys. I'm confused. Just put a feeder on it, Josh, and feed consistently every day for a year. Um, any it's a complex thing to try to explain. Like, we'll have to talk about it on here, and bring up whatever problems are coming in there, and you can DM me pictures or whatever. I can help you manage it. It's pretty easy. Um, there won't be anything happening to you that hasn't happened to me a couple million times, so don't worry about that. But just feed what the bluegill will eat in about 20 minutes, and you might find that when you first start your feeding program that they don't understand what it is. They don't come to it. Start with just a handful or two. Just walk out, and I usually start them by hand feeding them. And if you can't get them, they'll figure out what it is usually pretty quick. But if you can't get them, sometimes they'll be stubborn, and try it in the morning, like right as the sun's coming up, or in the evening, right as the sun's going down, that kind of twilight time. You usually find a little bit more success getting them to learn then for some reason. Um, and then just there's so many variables, when we could go on for days and days and days about everything that could happen. But I would say the easiest, best way to help your pond compete against whatever's in there is to feed those bluegill, because you like your crappie, your green sunfish, your other species of sunfish won't take those pellets, but the bluegill will. So by supplementing the bluegills food daily, you've got healthier bluegill, which are just naturally bigger than all the other fish around them, which gives them an advantage. But it also, they have more eggs and they have bigger spawns, and then that helps them compete against the other fish that are there as well. Uh, but I had mentioned it. I don't think I finished it. We were talking about Flipping Kicks sent me a picture of his bass that he caught. Now, he caught one. He's been feeding his bluegill in his 2.5 acre pond, but he does have crappie. He's been doing some harvesting, and he's doing what he can to try to manage it. And he's feeding his bluegill just like we've been talking about. But he still pulled out the other day. He pulled out a 16-inch bass that was at 80% relative weight, and that's what I mean. He's pulling fish out, and he's doing what he can. He's doing everything he can. But in this situation, that doesn't guarantee you anything. Like those crappie, for whatever reason, I think it's just environmental. Like it has to stack up right or whatever. Can flip the script on you quick and can wreck your pond. And there's really just not a lot you can do about it. Just drain it and restock it and hope they don't get back in there. Uh, he's kind of in a situation where a drain and restock in a homeowners association pond probably won't work, but you usually won't get people to agree to do that. So when you have competing species, try talking right. You can expect that right there. You do everything right. I'm going through all the steps. I'm doing all the stuff, but wow, I still have some of these fish still kind of poor. They're not measuring good, and that's exactly what competing species do. That's exactly what crappie do. No matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, you don't really fix it. Not all the time either. Sometimes you go out there, keep a bunch of crappie, things swing around, bass come back, all is right with the world. Sometimes you go out there, fish 20 times, keep crappie, have fish fries, and end up in a worse place than you were the year prior. You know, Sometimes it gets to where you get so sick of crappie fishing and them not getting any bigger and nothing ever changing, and that you have to make 20 trips a year and you don't get any results. You know, that I've seen a lot of. to where guys just throw their hands up and it's like, well, I'm not they won't drain them for whatever reason. And then, and then they just don't fish them. And then the pond just sits there, there's a lot of that. Let's see. Anthony's got another one coming through. When building a brand new bass pond that is spring fed, we can talk about spring fed, define that. Yeah, there's a lot of things to consider. The first thing you need to consider, Anthony, is hire an engineer. Hire an engineer. I'll say that clearly. Must be an hour. Yep. My voice starts doing this about an hour. Yes, you are going to spend money, but you can't. I see a lot of mistakes around building ponds. It has to do with a science called hydrology. Hydrology is the study of how water moves through the groundwater flow. So when you say spring fed, like everybody through the history since forever of pond management for the last 30 whatever years, I've been doing this 30 years, everybody's pond is spring fed. Actually, very few ponds that I've worked on are true spring fed ponds. What they're actually referring to is called groundwater flow. So if you think about the ground without concrete, without people's roofs, just natural dirt, it rains, right? The water hits the ground and goes straight down. Gravity pulls it straight down. Water, most places, like you don't want it channelized running across the surface, right? That's bad. So we'll fix that kind of stuff. But when it's not doing that, when it's actually just working properly and raining on the ground, the water molecule goes down into the ground, gets pulled down into the ground, goes straight down through the ground, down to the ground, down. If it doesn't get picked up by like the roots of a tree or a plant or whatever, it just keeps on going. Gravity pulls it, keeps pulling it down through the ground. Any sort of like minerals that are in that ground, like limestone, the water picks up as it percolates through, kind of like coffee. And eventually it ends up down in the creeks, down in the bottoms. And it's a highly complex science. And it has to do with how much ground you have uphill. Everything flows downhill. So an engineer can look at that ground and say, all right, it takes like 20 acres of land uphill for every water acre you want full, roughly. So they can look at the watershed on where you want to build that pond, and they can tell you, all right, you've got a watershed of this many acres, therefore you can have a pond of this many acres. That's how that works. It's a complete science. The problem you're going to have with that is going to be, where you are. You can't just, like, even though you own the land, you don't own the water, and you're going to get into all these weird kind of permitting rights. You can't just build a pond anymore. That's usually not how that works. As a matter of fact, the last thing you're going to do is build a pond, because where you've got to build that pond is on a wetland. There's going to be water there. It's probably going to be protected. So again, I said this the other day and I'll say it again. They got the permits to do the pond at Sugar Hill Outdoors because that's an irrigation pond for a commercial landscape architecture facility. The primary purpose of that pond is irrigation for commercial plants that they're growing. We just got lucky to get involved with it and be able to do our little project alongside, in an irrigation system. That's pretty much what that is, but that's how they got the permitting to build that pond. They just didn't go say, hey, I own the land and I'm building a pond. No. Nope. Just because it's your pond or your land doesn't mean anything anymore, man. There are rules, and those rules have to do with, there's federal rules, then there's state rules, then there's city rules. And all that depends on where you live. So I guess the point, I've been doing this now for 4 years. I was lucky enough after the first year to meet Clint and get involved with that new pond project that we're using as an example, Sugar Hill Outdoors. And do you see me going to any other ponds? You know, wouldn't you think if I had another pond that would be good content? It would be great content. I'd set up the other pond a little bit different and do a kind of a little different genetics experiment. And, I would do, we would have like these different variables that we could track, and study and watch. Boys, we only have one pond because that's the only pond that's come my way in 4 years. This isn't a huge industry. And we're really lucky to have this pond and have this learning experience. I'm very fortunate to be able to, like I said, because if you can't literally do what I just did in front of 27,000 people and go, hey, look, here's a 5-inch bass. Hey, look, 17 months later, here's a 4-pound bass. They don't believe you. I know, because I've been saying this for 30 years and nobody believed me. Nobody started believing me until I started making videos, proving it for real, going live. That's why I go live. You can't edit live. I've been preparing for this for a long time, and we'll continue to go live too, because you can't edit live. And I'm not playing these, oh, you probably just did it, whatever, AI did or whatever. No, didn't do that either. Grew it. I don't know. But it's nice to like get into a conversation with like colleagues, not these internet conversations that you can watch in this chat, with somebody who's done it before. Right? Because once you have the experience, all right, now we can have a conversation based in reality, and I think those conversations are important for guys who've never done it before to listen to, and so we can skip over the spinning of tires on the general information everybody thinks that they know that they actually don't. But I don't know. I'll just keep throwing it out there. Hey, we got 8 folks on Wednesday morning. Pretty good, man. Appreciate y'all. All right. Let me go back and check my questions. Oh, so Josh, just feed your fish what they eat in about 20 minutes. And like I said, feed them around dawn and dusk to get started. That's usually easiest. And you don't want a bunch of fish feed floating around. That's just going to cause you algae problems, nutrient loading problems. You want the fish to consume the feed. And before very long, your budget will kind of dictate how much food you throw to them, because it's a real cost. It's expensive, especially if you're throwing the high protein stuff. I don't see any more questions, boys. But any other feeding tips I can think of? Not really. It's pretty easy, man. It's just like, oh, I guess we can touch too a bit on like, so in Georgia, like that 100 pounds of fish per acre, but I started feeding. So what did that bring it up to? Probably at the rate we're feeding, we're probably about 300 to 350 pounds of fish. I'm not pushing it as hard, like wide open 100%, but I don't ever do that on anything in ponds. You don't want to do that. So I would say my pond is probably holding, make it easy numbers, 300 pounds of fish per acre because of the feeding program instead of 100 pounds that Georgia naturally holds. So if you go to say some places more fertile where the water's really green, upper Midwest is in Chicago, be a good example. Those ponds probably holding around 400 pounds of fish per acre. So I'm not raising my fish levels with my feeding program past what would be considered unnatural levels, like aquaculture levels, where you've got thousands of pounds of fish and disease and ammonia, and you've got to add salt and all these chemicals because of the chemistry problems. It's not that kind of feeding program. People come on here and think it is and accuse me of doing stuff like that, but it's not. We've just bumped it enough that we've taken what would be considered a naturally unproductive pond and bumped it to what it would naturally hold what we consider a naturally productive pond. But I'm not making it like where do you live, Anthony? Are you in Mobile? Were you the guy in Mobile? Sorry, man. Let me go back and look. It's because if you are, it's about 100. It's about the same in the Southeast, all over the Southeast. The carrying capacity, you'll be able to tell the carrying capacity changes by the clarity of the water. Like I said, oh, Northeast Pennsylvania. Oh crap. I don't know. I'm not sure. The carrying capacity of the water. This is how you would measure it. Okay. So if you said how do you tell how many pounds of fish are in this water? The test that you run is called chlorophyll A. So what you are checking for, you take a liter of water, and you dip it out a few places around the lake. You spin that water down in a centrifuge, and what you're actually doing is collecting the chlorophyll and the phytoplankton in the water, the microscopic plankton in the water. You're collecting the chlorophyll out of that and you're measuring it. That's a direct correlation. However much chlorophyll is in that water, there'll be a direct correlation of pounds of fish per acre. So in Georgia, our water is very clear. Like you can see 8, 10, 12 feet down in, like in Lake Lanier, you can see 45 feet down it, in the bigger lakes, like you can see way down. Very clear water. Okay. So that very clear water means there's not much plankton density. We can see way down in there. All right. So when we do our chlorophyll A test on water like that, which I know because I've done it, it's low. And we know that's low productivity water. Clear water is low productivity. What is high productivity water? Pea soup green. What you're looking at is millions and millions and millions of microscopic plants floating in the water that have chlorophyll. And that is what creates the green color in the water. The plankton is creating that green color. So when you dip that water out and you run chlorophyll A and you test you're getting the chlorophyll out of that plankton, it's a much higher density because again, you can see it in the water. It's green water, right? It looks like pea soup. Obviously different from our clear water. Okay, so that measurement is a direct correlation to the pounds of fish in the water. So that is exactly how you would tell visually without doing all the calculations and collections and everything like that. Clear water is unproductive water and green water is more productive water, the most productive water. So when you learn to look at it like that, then you learn to understand if you let aquatic plants grow over a lake and allow those aquatic plants to clear the water, or if you have a lake that, hey, wow, the summertime came and all the lily pads and all the plants came out and look how clear and pretty the water is. All those plants just cleared the base of your food chain right out. All the larval fish, all the baby bluegill that are born that want to eat zooplankton don't have zooplankton to eat now because the lily pad took that nutrients out of the water. That's what you're looking at. So when you see that water clear, like most people think that's a good thing. When I see that water clear, man, I know your fish population is taking a shot. Everything born starving to death within a day or two. There's no zooplankton there. See how your frame changes when you understand the environment? So Anthony, I would say short, if that doesn't help you, just ask a biologist next time you're around local DNR guys. They can probably tell you, man. They can probably tell you. But if you have pea soup water that you can only see about 12 inches in, it's probably 350 pounds. And if it's vodka clear and you can see the bottom at 8 feet, it's probably closer to 100. That'd be my guess. All right, boys. An hour and 15 on a random Wednesday, I think, is good enough. Let me double check, make sure I didn't miss anyone. I don't think I did. And if you have one more question you want to fire in down there, please do. Let's see, fish. I missed this one. What's this about? In Arizona, only allowed to harvest of one bass over 13 inches. We have a ton of bass under 2 pounds. Yeah, you run into that problem, fish. Zito? How do you say that word? My eyes are bad. As we do? Is that as? I see as we do on your thing. How does it as? I'm bad at the acronyms, boys. I'm too old. Anyway, I'm going to call you fish. You can definitely have homeowner associations or state regulations that will prevent you from harvesting the fish necessary to get bass growth going again. You can be handcuffed that way for sure, because the bureaucracy is not the most efficient way to do things. It is a system, maybe not the best system, but it's a system and it has its limitations like all systems. So, excuse me. You can definitely have a situation where you need to harvest a bunch of fish and the regulations will not allow you to. I have seen that before. Midwest talking about mussel zebras, zebra mussels in the Great Lakes, invasive mussel species. Yeah, they're causing problems. I read an article about that as well. Yeah, that it's like people put a spin on like, oh, it's cleaning the water. No, it's not clean. Yeah, it's making the water clearer, which is reducing the. So now you've got a bunch of snails on the bottom that are taking the zooplankton out of the water instead of your larval fish. And the thing about it is like it doesn't matter what larval fish you're talking about. You could be talking about bass. You could be talking about pike, muskie, smallmouth. You could be talking about any species of forage, shad, bluegill, whatever. All fish start out larval eating zooplankton. So when you start getting things that are clearing the water, that are clearing the zooplankton population out, you're clearing the fish population out at a larval level, all of it, predators, prey, all of it. And that's why you don't see a big fish kill. On zebra mussels are doing to that exactly what letting aquatic weeds would do to your pond. Go just cover 30% of your pond up, let the water clear up. Yeah, man, your fish will get skinny. Anthony's asking, is there any way to feed them passively if you don't live near it and can't manage to feed it regularly? No. Good question, Anthony. And the answer to that question is don't feed them at all. It's better just to leave them alone, let it be, a natural, or as natural as a man-made environment can be that we're managing this way. But let's put it this way. Don't boost it and then not boost it and then boost it and then not boost it. Right? It would do the same thing to your car motor if you're putting a turbocharge on it. I forgot to click the ringer off. Sorry. So if you can't feed every day the right way, don't feed at all. You can still have a perfectly healthy fish population. Like you'll still have good, if not great, bass growth. Like from the 100 pounds of fish per acre to the 350 pounds of fish per acre, right? I can still have super healthy, aggressively growing bass that grow to be monsters at the 100 pounds of fish per acre level. Okay. Just because it's low in productivity doesn't mean that I can't have big fish. Okay. That's another place that this gets twisted. The logic gets twisted. Just because, I'll say it again, just because my productivity is low and I only support 100 pounds of fish per acre doesn't mean I can't grow a 13-pound bass in that. I just have to adjust the bass population down so those fish have enough forage in that lower level environment that they can get the forage they need to feed up to grow. You can have great fishing in low productivity clear water, right? That doesn't have anything to do with fish size. And that's kind of where we've started this whole conversation out, tying it back together nicely. This is concerning the balance of the fish population. The numbers of prey to the numbers of predators is what dictates the size of each, right? Not the total pounds of fish in the environment. The total pounds of fish in the environment stays the same. The size of each group depends on the combinations of those sizes of what you've got. This is much more complex than you realize, boys. Jackson's asking, do I recommend liming a pond before adding fertilizer? I recommend, if you're going to be fertilizing a pond, that you get a guy like me to do it. Or you get some consulting advice, because that's tricky business. And I would run a lime, just run a standard water test at your local county extension agent. In Georgia, it costs you about $20. They'll run it through university. I haven't run one in about 5 or 6 years, so it might be a little higher than that now. But again, as far as cost effectiveness, your cooperative extension agent at your local county, you can usually just send the water test in there. They'll send it to the kids at school and give them something to do for a project for the day, and they charge you a little bit, but you get it back, and they'll tell you if you need to lime it or not. You only lime ponds if you need to, because you've got to spread a couple tons of lime per acre. I was talking to Garrett about that the other day. He was talking about spreading 9 tons or something. It's like 9 tons. 250 tons is my liming record. 250 tons was some work, son. I loaded 100 tons with wheelbarrows before. We couldn't get the daggone tractor down close enough. We had to use wheelbarrows. So I put in work like that. And my advice to you is test the water. And if you don't need the lime, don't add it, because it's just a waste of money if you don't need it, and a back-breaking work. And why do back-breaking work if you don't need to? So what's going on here? What he's asking, we can boost, we're talking about adding fertilizer to the pond. We can boost the plankton, the phytoplankton, with fertilizer, which then in turn boosts the zooplankton. And I can create this situation. I could take that 100 pounds and make it 400 pounds using fertilizer. Instead of using feeder and feeding the bluegill directly, I can do it with fertilizer and just become a plankton farmer. It's trickier though, because it has to do with the amount of water flowing through your pond and the water chemistry. Feeding's easier. Anybody can feed for 20 minutes. That's all you got to do. Fertilizing is trickier, and it requires, it's tricky for me to do, and it's never the same twice. The weather changes, so it can be tricky. And you can actually have ponds that have too much water flow that the fertilizer just runs out, and you can't keep the bloom at a high enough level due to flow rates. That's called calculating a retention time. And what that means is how long does the volume of water that's in the pond stay in the pond? Or does the volume of water that's in the pond flow out of the water? Out of the pond. Does that volume flow out in a month? If that volume of water flows out in a month, you can't use fertilizer as a management tool the way we're describing it, because it's too much water flow. So that's why I told Jackson, you want probably going to want to get a pro, because doing that is trickier than you think. Josh, see what he's got going. Aren't the actively feeding fish? I'm not understanding. Bing, is that you mean bluegill there? Oh, okay, Josh, I got your question. That's cool. Let's see what Zach has got going here. Which mark tag recapture method do you feel is best for assessing how many bass or bluegill are in your pond? I don't really like doing mark recapture studies. I've tried them, Zach. You can try them too. I would say my favorite for a pond though is I don't want to stab my fish with needles. I don't want to disrupt my fish's slime coat. I guess what I'm getting at is I've seen tagging. I've seen people try to tag fish and kill them all. And so in an attempt to try to track fish growth, they killed all their fish. That happens a lot because fish tagging is very unnatural, right? Um, and it's for that reason I don't like tagging fish and don't tag fish. Have I tried a couple mark recapture studies? I have, and I tagged a bunch of fish. And it takes a long time to tag fish too, man. You're out there working, you're putting all these tags in, and I did the kind that go in on a needle, kind of go in like with a plastic tag, like you would put in with a clothing. Look very similar to what comes in your clothes, goes into the fish, and that plastic sticks in them, stays there. And then what I found out, even those the ponds that I did it in were under 10 acres, I had a really hard time recapturing any of the fish that I had tagged to compare their growth, even though I did have a shocking boat. And I did tag a significant number of fish. I hardly ever saw them again. And then the ones that I did see again, a significant portion of them seemed to be stuck at, even though they're in a new pond in a population that was growing, like doing real well with 100% relative weights, or higher, like growing like Sugar Hill Outdoors fish. The fish with the tags weren't growing. We're like still at 8 inches or 6 inches or wherever, we're not all of them, but some of them. Like let's put enough of them that it made me suspicious. And that happened to me several times. A few over a 30-year career, you're going to get guys that request different things of you. And a few times these tagging type mark recapture things have come. And my advice to you is not to do it. Use relative weight. Don't mark your fish up. If you have to do it, the best way I've seen to do it is use an old, it looks kind of like it's a metal and it looks like it handles on scissors kind of, but it just punches one hole in paper. A paper punch, a hole punch. You remember that from kindergarten? We used to have them for punching holes, making art projects and crap. But one of them little hole punches you get at the dollar store, and I'll punch not in the meat, but on either a pec fin or the tail fin, punch through the fin with a hole punch. And it'll take several months for that hole to grow out, or it'll take a while for that hole to grow over. But when that hole does grow over, it'll leave a wave in the tail fin, and it'll take a couple years for that hole punch wave to grow out. So if you punch them like in the kind of bottom quadrant of the tail a little bit right there, and you can tell the ones that you've caught before that way without doing too much damage to their body or to their slime coat or anything like that. And if you had to tag one, physically mark one, that's probably the way I would do it. But truthfully, we leave well enough alone. Measure it, check its relative weight, Is it growing? Is it a good fish for 16 inches or 18 inches or 20 inches? Is it holding the weight it needs to hold? That's really the important information for me. You'll give me a lot more information giving me the relative weight than any sort of mark recapture stuff. No, yeah, Midwest, you do not need to add fertilizer to anything up there. You are the opposite of that. As a matter of fact, he lives in an area where the water is so green and fertile that the plants around the edges become necessary. And not only that, there's companies that make rafts and islands and do plantings and aquatic to try to get the nutrients, the phosphorus and nitrogen, because you can have too much plankton. And what happens is then the plankton produces most of the oxygen that the fish breathe. But the problem is at night, it respires. And if you have a really dense phytoplankton bloom, it can remove all the oxygen at night and kill everything in the lake. That's called biological oxygen demand. And any plant can do that. Phytoplankton or water, lily pads or any plant. If you get too many of them, they'll kill your fish. So again, when we talk about balance of the system, it really truly is a balancing act. It can die in many different ways. But in the Midwest, you would not be adding any sort of nutrients, and you probably wouldn't even need to feed your fish the way I'm feeding my fish, because what goes in one end comes out the other, and you need to be careful with that too in the Midwest or in really green ponds. And it just goes back to where you are is so important. Not everything works everywhere, but if we understand the science, we understand, what we can and can't get away with. Yeah, Midwest is saying its BOD is enormous. Yeah, it is, dude. I've been up there before, and it's I prefer my clear water. Add me a little feed, dust in a little phosphorus, maybe. Okay, if I got to bump my phytoplankton up, okay, great, that's easy. But I've got something that I can control. You've got something you can't control. Like once you get up there and the phosphorus levels get to the point where you've put all the plants out, you've put the phosphorus remover in, you've done everything you can do, and it's still killing your fish. That you can be in a point out there, there's nothing you can do, and your fish are just dying. All right. That's much harder place for me to be in my low productivity water. But you're welcome, Zach. All right, boys. I don't see that I missed anything. Midwest says he feels like he's back in his conservation classes in undergrad school. Yeah, dude, I love these conversations too, man. It's funny. That's why I started doing these stuff, man. It's like they're like, if you can keep people engaged, you can make money on the internet. And I'm like, well, I can definitely keep people engaged. Let's see some of this money you guys keep talking about. Frank, we got to put Frank's comment. Frank's there for comedic relief as usual. No, Frank, we are not down with BOD. It kills all our fish. Remember? You got it mixed up. Anthony, that's a good question, dude. I get them kind of as Clint sends them to me. I don't live close to the pond anymore. I usually go to the pond about once a month, and I'm due to go back. I should go today, but I don't know. Maybe I'll go tomorrow. I'll go sometime soon. But we've also got an electrofishing survey coming up with Garrett, one of the guys who follows the page. He did a live actually with me here. He's the first live that I did. We covered it. And we're actually going to be going live again and talking about electrofishing again and trying to get him some work because he's coming from Texas. But we're going to actually put some real scientific work into it this season. It's about the point that I need it. I've had a couple spawns and, like I said, just kind of want to see where I'm at. I don't need to electrofish ponds once a year anymore. I don't think. I feel like I have a good enough grasp of what's going on. Sorry. But it'll be good content for the page. And it'll be coming out in April. So hopefully this month we'll be catching a few more fish. But and then in April there we will have an electrofishing survey, and we'll get down to brass tacks of what's going on in Sugar Hill Outdoors real quick with Shock Boat. Really quickly. And did I miss anybody's questions? Shocking Boat doesn't play. Really, Wascally Wabbit going hunting. It's unfair. I can remember though the first time, like, it's funny too because it matters who is operating that electrofishing rig. Like it matters who's operating a fishing rod, right? I can remember the first time I touched, and when you sample streams, you use a backpack shocker, lower voltage. It won't kill you. It'll bump you pretty good, but it won't kill you. We used to shock each other on purpose with it, so I know it won't kill you. You don't want no part of electrofishing boat. That's a different beast. That will kill you. But I got on this gig where this dude was doing a PhD level, classes and getting his PhD in ecology, and he was doing a bunch of fish sampling, and he needed help. And he needed so much help that it actually ended up turning into a paying gig. And I don't blame him. Like, he gave us all kind of a little task to do at the beginning of the whole project. And we had 36 streams that we sampled twice a year. So in the Southern Appalachian Mountains. So it was not a small project. We were traveling, staying in hotels, going on weekends, all weekend, sampling all day long. It was a pretty intense project for what he needed help, and I like sampling the fish and making money shocking fish. So it worked out for me and my buddy Stephen Patrick, who comes on here sometimes with us. He was there too. But he wouldn't let us do the shocking. He did the shocking. We did the netting. And there was kind of this hierarchy like that for a while. So we nagged and nagged and nagged. We wanted to. And part of what was going on though too is a battery operated deal. So you couldn't just like go get more fuel. Like you had to charge the batteries, and they worked only a certain amount of time, and we needed them, like, with the amount of sampling that we did, literally every minute of battery power was accounted for. And we couldn't like go pleasure shocking the way that we wanted to, just fooling around. He wouldn't let us do that. But one day, I don't know, it happened. I don't know. I can't remember exactly how it all went down. But one day he did allow us to. We did the survey. We were done. We were heading back to Athens. We had batteries left. You guys can go play with it. Go do it. Woo, yeah. So Stephen grabs the net. I grab the backpack shocker. And we're in the area that, we're supposed to be sampling. Like we were supposed to sample the same 100-meter section every season for this fish sample thing he was doing. So we're still in the sample area. And like I said, who's holding that shocker matters. And there was a rock. It came out. It created an undercut bank, but it was underwater, and it wasn't an undercut bank. It was an overhanging rock, but it created from the position that I was in an undercut bank, and it was a really big rock. And I took the whip and I put it out on one side of the rock, and I took the probe and I stuck it up under the water and went way up under the other side of the rock and completed the circuit. I turned the buttons on and got a charge under that rock. I don't know, like as wide as you can hold your hands out, like that, maybe 6-7 feet from the tips of your fingers underwater. Though I did like that and turned it on. I rolled like a 21-inch trout out from under that instantly. And Dale completely freaked out, the guy running the project. we used it as like, because that was important data for the project. We actually used that fish as sampling data. And then from then on, I was the man who ran the backpack shocker. I didn't take that thing off for a couple of years. But it matters, like we sampled that whole section of stream with it and missed that fish. And I went back in there and, like 5 seconds later and got that fish. And it's just having that fisherman's perspective. You guys know what I'm talking about. All right, boys. I think I'm going to go to the grocery store. Looking like it's going to start raining out there. I was going to go to the river, but I don't feel like getting wet. Yeah, dude. I've been around a lot of fish sampling. I've shocked a lot of fish up. Shocked so many fish up, I don't want to do it anymore. Just leave that for the kids to do. That's their work. It's just a hard job. Anyway, that's funny. All right, fellas, I think I'm done talking. It's been an hour and 40, and I'm coughing and scratchy throat and itchy nose again and all that. But I certainly appreciate you boys. I hope it helps. And I will be back probably Sunday night to do it all again. Thank you. See you next time.